Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining the Payday Super session that we're running here today. We have already run a tech session that Emma ran back in June of this year, where we had both investment updates, Payday Super updates, other legislative changes sort of discussed. That's something that we continue to try to do each year. We've also sent out about half a dozen employer updates. So sorry if I'm spamming your inbox, but hopefully on occasion those are useful. And yeah, we've issued a few updates on Payday Super via those emails. We've got a landing page that continues to be updated. And we now have legislation around all of this. But as always, and with all things super, we're here to support. So please reach out to your relationship manager, outside of times when we're running these sessions to obviously get the help that you need with anything like these sorts of topics. Now, I did want to, before we jumped into this session, just acknowledge and pay my respects to traditional custodians of the land. Where I am here in Melbourne, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And the Wurundjeri people definitely hold knowledge in high importance, and passing that on through stories. So hopefully we can try to pass on and impart some knowledge today on some of these sorts of changes that are going on. But if you did feel like sharing who the traditional custodians of the lands are from where you're joining from today, then feel free to drop that into the chat if you wish. Now, it wouldn't be a session like this without the important messages that we've got on this slide in terms of this is general advice. It does not take into account your personal circumstances or needs. Before acting on anything here, obviously speak to a qualified financial planner. If you'd like a copy of the PDS, a target market determination or financial services guide, please, as I say, reach out to us, speak to your RM, or grab that from our website. In terms of things we'll be covering off on today, so we'll talk about the timings of these changes. We'll talk about some of the details, other related changes. So there's a few things that will help facilitate Payday Super, but is actually outside of the legislation itself. We'll talk briefly about some of the defined benefit impacts. So some of our employers that are joining here today will have defined benefit members. For those that don't, lucky for you in terms of things are a little bit simpler, but even on the DB side, it's not too bad in terms of complexity. And then obviously how to get more information. And as I say, we're always here to help, whether it be this change or other things related to super. So feel free to reach out to your relationship manager or I at any stage. In terms of the timeline, so this legislation was announced back by the government in 2023. There was some extra basic details in 2024, and then some actual draft legislation came through in March, so the pre-election. But it didn't actually become law until last month, and it's due to take effect from the 1st of July next year. So another factor that you'll see listed here that will not necessarily impact the bulk of you today, but it's not getting a lot of the headlines, but a lot of small or medium-sized business will be impacted, is a small business clearinghouse that's due to close and has actually already had a soft close by the ATO back in October. So yeah, that's obviously important for a lot of the smaller entities around the country who even now are no longer able to add new members as part of that, but obviously they're able to register with our Equip Super Employer portal if they wish. So that's the timeline of events to date. So why is this all happening? What's the purpose of the legislation? Why is the government doing this? So they're really trying to help the ATO enforce and solve for the issue that is unpaid super. So the ATO is going to be given the task of matching their single touch payroll info that all of your employers report to them with the information reported to us or reported by us super funds. So unpaid super, as I'm sure you'll all appreciate, is equivalent to wage theft. And thankfully, it's not so much of an issue within our fund, but many other funds and many Australians are impacted by this. So it's understandable that the government is taking some of these steps to try and improve the system. It'll also mean earlier and more frequent contributions. So that'll no doubt help members' benefits grow a little bit faster and them achieve a slightly more income in retirement, which is what we're all about. It should also have the side effect of helping build a little bit more member engagement. So hopefully a few more people will actually look at the contributions coming into their account a few days after Payday Super. Oh, sorry, a few days after Payday. But we can actually help you manage expectations around that. So closer to the date, you may actually find that members are starting to look at their bank accounts and see that their pay is hit, and also then expect that at the same time, the contributions will have hit their super account. So we'll need to manage expectations a little bit there, but we can help you with the communications that it's going to be close to their payday, but obviously there'll still be a little bit of processing time involved there, so it won't be the exact same timing. So in terms of the highlights of the change and the new rules, it's as simple as the name suggests, pay on payday, but technically you've got 7 business days for the contributions to reach funds. There'll be 3 days for funds to process and return any amounts when they see errors. So that's a large tightening of that time frame, which currently sits at 20 days. And the ATO will also be adding more admin resources to assist employers throughout this process. So that's what they promise us. So that set of rules probably doesn't come as a surprise to most on the call. In terms of employer obligations, so there's a need for that quick payment. It'll be based on a new term referred to as qualifying earnings, which we'll discuss a little bit more of in a moment. But it needs to be really ready to be allocated, or allocable, I think is what the legislation calls it. So in essence, we need to have all the data associated with that. Yeah, one of the nice changes from the draft legislation is that when that draft came through pre the federal election this year, that was referring to the timeline for these contributions, making it to super funds like us, 7 calendar days, whereas that's been changed to 7 business days. So employers have been given a little bit more time, but please be mindful of the fact that whilst that is helpful for public holidays, just be conscious that they are the federal ones and the state ones that will not be counted. But if it's more of a local show day, the clock does not stop ticking. So just be mindful of the sorts of public holidays that are excluded there. To put your minds at ease though, so even now under the current sort of remittances that you're doing with the employer portal, so those that are using our no additional costs equipped super employer portal, even now the contribution load time is just under 3 days. So the average contribution is faster than what these new requirements entail. So that's good. You will also have a bit longer, or quite a bit longer, for new staff or choice of fund. So there will be a 20-day time frame. And as with a lot of other things, there is the need to keep records for a period of 7 years there. So a lot of that is kept on our systems in terms of the employer portal for those who use that, but obviously there'll be a number of people on the call that are using external end-to-end sort of payroll providers and clearinghouses. Qualifying earnings. So what are they? So that's a new definition within the Payday Super legislation, but essentially it's still ordinary time earnings. It is trying to clarify that as opposed to back in the day when employers could count salary sacrifice of their people as part of their superannuation guarantee contributions, that was changed a few years back. So it does clarify that salary sacrifice is included in those qualifying earnings. And other examples of things that need to be taken into account are performance bonuses and commissions. But please check out the updated definition of employee. I guess probably more of an issue for people that have got people in the gig economy, but please take a look at that. If you're interested, we can send you some relevant links to the ATO pages if you need those, and they'll also be at the end of the presentation. There is a bit of a new look to some of the penalties for non-compliance with the Payday Super timelines. So the ATO has been handed a big stick by the government to enforce the new rules. Thankfully, not something that our employers typically need to worry too much about, as we see you all doing a good job by our members and remitting in a prompt fashion, and often far more regularly than what the current SG legislation requires at the moment. The SG, the superannuation guarantee charge that applies, will apply when amounts aren't received by a super fund within the 7 business days of payday that I mentioned earlier, unless an extended time frame applies, such as for those with new employees. The SGC will be assessed by the ATO and is calculated based on those qualifying earnings I mentioned a moment ago. The general interest charge, it compounds daily if that needs to be applied for any late contributions. And at the moment, I think when I just looked a moment ago, it was sitting at 10.61%. So it's kind of been hovering between the 10 and 11% mark. So it is a hefty impost. So yeah, the ATO is keen and the government's keen for us to see those contributions coming in on time. There's also an administrative uplift, which can vary based on the employer's history of compliance and meeting their super guarantee obligations. But we're happy to chat to you further about some of the sting in the tail if you happen to miss some of these deadlines that I've mentioned. Thankfully, the government and the ATO have acknowledged that there is a bit of change with these new rules. So they are looking to be a little bit more lenient with enforcing the new rules in year 1, so next financial year, for most employers. So in a sense, if you're making your best attempts to comply and paying your super on payday, trying to fix those errors promptly, they will judge you as a low risk. And so they're not likely to take any action or apply any of those penalties that I mentioned on the previous slide. However, or similarly, if you're a medium risk, they'll deem that to be the case if you're paying by essentially what are the rules today. So if you're making your contributions within 28 days of the end of the quarter, so like the SG rules as they apply now. However, they will start looking at and still looking to penalise those who are judged high risk. And essentially, they're the employers that are paying later than even what the rules are now. And they're really the ones that they're trying to crack down on in general with this legislation. And I did go to a forum recently where the ATO said that they're already starting that process of matching contributions more and putting in more effort to see if employers are paying on time. So, I mean, make your own assessments as to where you sit in this risk zone as to how much the ATO is going to be paying attention to this. But as always, our employers are pretty good and look to try and comply with any new legislation, which is great. So appreciate all your efforts there. And as I say, throughout, we're happy to help.
Now, Andre, yes. Sorry to interrupt. We're just having a few questions come through on the chat, and one that Sophie's raised in regards to employees with self-managed super funds, which is a common payroll bugbear, where all of a sudden the SMSF is not compliant. The payroll then need to contact employees to get onto it with their accountant, but obviously it can take a long time for both the accountant and the employee to do that. Do you know what the approach will be from the ATO within the 20 days requirement?
Yeah, look, we might have to take that one away in terms of how much in year 1 they're going to be concerned about that. I think if you're in some of the lower risk zones, that's going to be less of an issue.
I can probably answer you a little bit there. Sorry to interrupt. So yeah, if it's a non-compliant fund, like the ESA has expired or shut down, any of those sorts of reasons, you'll get the error from the super fund. So the fund should return the cons within that new 3-day rejection requirement. So that's the requirement on the fund if it's not a lockable, so it hasn't got all the correct information. And then you'll have 20 days. So it's still 20 days from the payday, but you'll have 20 days to fix it. And in some cases, the fix might be that you'll go through the stapling/default process. So if the employee is unable to provide the information, then you might have to go through stapling and say, look, this is the member's stapled fund, and do it that way so that you meet the 20-day requirement.
And I hope that it should also answer Desai's question, or Sheeta Desai, who's just asked about if the super is processed on payday and for some reason the super has been refunded after 7 days processing time, will it be considered as wage theft or not compliant to payday super? Provided you make the contribution with all the required information, I believe the employer will be compliant and the ATO will take a lenient look at that.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Emma. Super stream upgrades. So besides some of the payday super legislation itself, there's a number of things that are being done to help support it and generally to improve the whole system. So the gateways and clearinghouses and systems that use SuperStream and get the data and money from employees to funds is being upgraded. So this will help Payday Super work. And to be honest, it should probably happen anyway because it's an improvement. So the first and probably most significant of these is improvements to error message. So the improvements to error messages will be essentially to make them a lot clearer, dare I say it, a bit more English and understandable, so the payroll teams can more easily understand any issues that occur. So something that payroll people have actually complained about for quite some time. Definitely had that feedback over the years that the error messages are too cryptic. So this should be solved for in time for the start of Payday Super. There'll be more info provided to payroll providers and clearinghouses about mergers. So I know that the constantly changing USIs when one fund merges with another has been a problem as well. And mergers are no doubt important. So it helps us super funds get greater scale, improve services and keep downward pressure on fees and do the best we can by members. But this will definitely help manage the logistics around them a bit better. The other significant one is just around the new member verification files that will be introduced. So this will be an important update where via your clearinghouses, employers will actually be able to check that members are with the funds they're looking to remit to, so pre-remittance. And some of the test cases that I've heard about where there's been some preparations done by other clearinghouses, this has reduced the error rate by about 90%. So it's definitely a handy way to improve the data that's flowing through, is because I'm sure you'd appreciate the bulk of the errors tend to happen when people are first onboarded or when they leave their employers. There'll be also a change to adopt a new payments platform. So that'll result in near instant payments, and you will be able to use that to remit your contributions. So save some time in transit. Like when you split a bill at a restaurant and pay someone pretty much instantaneously with your banking. That's what the new payments platform was originally designed for, but they're currently working on scaling that so it'll work with superannuation remittances and the sorts of quantums that we're talking about here. There won't necessarily be a requirement day one that you use that system, but the super funds will all be prepared to accept them in that way if needed. So some tips on how to prepare. So these are the highlights. So how to prepare for more prompt and generally more frequent payments. So for example, even making sure that the senior people who sign off on some of these contributions within your organization know that they'll need to go through this process more often. You may want to take a look at sort of common errors that you get at the moment and try to improve some of the steps you can take to try and prevent those. And please contact us if you think we might be able to help. Excuse me. Be mindful of the cash flow impacts. So most of you run large organizations, so this is unlikely to be that much of an issue, but there can be cases where particular bank accounts are used for these sorts of transactions. So it'll naturally be important to make sure there's enough money in those at the right times. Consider your onboarding process. It's important that new starters get all the various details about Equip Super and the benefits we provide. Obviously, we're always happy to help with inductions and having chat to sort of people in that case. but it'll also be particularly important for this purpose for them to get information back to you so that you can meet those deadlines. So that needs to happen pretty promptly, not quite as promptly as the 7 days. As I said before, it's a little bit more leading in terms of 20, but still something to be mindful of. Besides some of these highlights, we're also looking to put together a more detailed checklist to help everyone prepare. So we'll no doubt promote that soon in the new year via an employer update, but also have it dropped onto our Payday Super landing page on our website, which we've iterated a few times, as I said earlier already, and we'll continue to update that. That's got FAQs at the bottom, etc. So please check that out. A link to that will come up later in this presentation as well. Besides these tips, you could also actually think about whether or not you want to start early, just to try to work out some of the kinks. So if you wanted to, you could start to the latter part of this financial year. There will still be some further finer details coming through from the ATO shortly as well. So if there's anything of note there, we'll communicate those. You may also need to be conscious of, and one of the things they might be talking about is the fact that June contributions technically for this financial year will be due later than the July ones are, which are due on payday, sort of in many instances. So yeah, something to be mindful of, and something that I suspect they'll cover off on and provide some guidance for, but something you may need to sort of consider and be planning for toward the end of this financial year as well as talking to your payroll provider about any sort of single touch payroll updates or implications as well. So another related matter that isn't Payday Super itself, but is important for employers to note, is the fact that the maximum superannuation guarantee contribution base will be changing. So this is something that impacts high income earners at your organizations. This is the upper limit on how much SG an employer has to pay. So it's currently assessed quarterly, but the government and ATO moved to align those contributions to the equivalent of the annual $30,000 concessional contribution limit. And instead of being quarterly, it'll be moved to an annual limit. So you will need to consider those high income earners or really high income earners. Consider those in particular that are on salary packages. Be conscious of what your policy is as an employer about whether you enforce this maximum or not, as it could lead to them suddenly having an increase in their cash or take-home pay when the superannuation contributions are turned off and that $30,000 limit is reached. But then it may reduce again when the next financial year starts and this limit on contributions starts getting worked towards again. So yeah, please be mindful of that one and how you look to manage that. In terms of some of these changes and how it relates to defined benefits, so this is, yeah, obviously only for those employers joining today who have DB staff. Those who don't have a defined benefit plan, you could probably ignore the next minute or two. But every few years, we issue employers with benefit certificates that come from our actuary. And typically those are just filed away, which is fine. So ask your relationship manager if you need a copy of yours. The actuary is required to put a lot of formulas in these documents. They look a bit convoluted, but they're important for us to make sure that we help you comply with superannuation guarantee requirements. So some employers need to remit notional contributions to us for their defined benefits, not all, but many do. And these amounts are where we get data, but no money in respect to that data. So this may happen every period to help us make sure that DB members are getting at least the super guarantee, like an accumulation person. So they get the higher of accumulation and defined benefits. So the best of both worlds, lucky them. It can also happen in terms of notional contributions when defined benefit funding is really strong. So we may still need some notional amounts to come through in cases like that. But yeah, look, the long and the short of it is if this sounds a bit like gibberish to you and you do have a defined benefit plan, please reach out to your relationship manager. We can give you a hand to make sure that you're doing everything that needs to be done, and we can help you with that. So further sources of information. So obviously our Payday Super landing page that we've promoted a few times, that I mentioned a few times in this session. The ATO's page that's dedicated to this, and that continues to be updated as well. ASFA, which is the main super association, has a page on Payday Super 2, so there's some handy details there. And obviously, if anyone wants to go into the drier details and absolute nitty-gritty, well, then there's the legislative links there for those as well. But as always, if you need us to provide a helping hand, please speak to your relationship manager. They can either help directly or bring in the support that's needed, either from our admin team, our Equip Super Employer Portal people, or from representatives of the clearing house itself. So as I said, we'll continue to update the FAQs on our landing page as we go as well, both from sessions like this, things that we're hearing, and also based on new developments that come through. But they were the quick highlights of Payday Super. I'm happy to chat a bit further about other questions that have come through as well. But Emma, perhaps we stop the recording there to talk about more of those free range questions. Thanks.
Sure.
For those that happen to stick around.
Yep, recording has just stopped.